Topic 2.1 is an introduction to biodiversity. We should be able to explain levels of biodiversity and their importance to ecosystems. What is biodiversity? If we break it down, the prefix bio means life and diversity means variety. So biodiversity is all of the variety of life on Earth. The need for biodiversity. The more biodiverse an ecosystem is, the more resilient it is to change. So biodiversity helps an ecosystem maintain stability. And this means that when a disturbance occurs, if there's a flood or a fire, the more diverse ecosystems are generally better able to withstand and bounce back after that disturbance. We can look at this at the population level as well. The more genetically diverse a population is, the better able it is to respond to different environmental stressors. Why should we care about biodiversity? One example is with the anti-cancer drug Taxol. Taxol was first found in the bark of these giant yew trees in the Pacific Northwest, and it was found to have anti-tumor activity. The problem is the amount of Taxol in the plants themselves is actually very small. So what scientists did was to synthesize compounds that were similar to Taxol in the lab, and then they were able to make medication out of their synthesized compounds. So we were able to draw from inspiration in nature to come up with compounds that we could use in biomedicine. Low diversity systems would be monocultures. An example would be an agricultural field. So typically you've got a single crop that's grown. Mono means one. So if you have the single crop, they're very vulnerable to disease, pest, and other disturbances, because if your pest comes in, they're pretty easily able to spread from plant to plant. They don't have any barriers in their way. Natural ecosystems like the savanna here may appear to be monocultures, but they actually are quite diverse, and seasonally you would have different species which would be dominating. High diverse ecosystems are typically found at low latitudes around the equator. They're generally higher in biodiversity than ecosystems at higher latitudes and higher altitudes. So we usually think of our tropical rainforest as the most diverse places on Earth, and they're usually quite resistant to disturbance. We hear a lot about how we're destroying the rainforest, and what's happening is we're degrading the rainforest past a point where it can't recover. So we've pushed it past its brink, where even though it is a very diverse system, it is no longer able to recover. There's 3 levels of biodiversity. The first level is the genetic level. So this is different versions of the same gene within individual species. So we're talking about different alleles of the same gene. Populations can become more genetically diverse over time due to evolution and natural selection, but they can also become less genetically diverse due to the bottleneck effect. So what happens with the bottleneck effect? There's some stressor that's causing a drastic reduction in our population size. So our parent population was pretty evenly distributed with our blue and our yellow genes. And then something caused that population to shrink. And our surviving individuals were majority of the blue gene with just a couple yellow genes. So our next generation is going to be predominantly blue and have a couple of the yellow genes interspersed. So we've seen quite a change from our parent population to the next generation, just due to the genes that were able to be passed along. The next level of biodiversity is species diversity. This is the number of different species that are represented in a specific community. Species richness looks at how many species, and species evenness looks at how many of those organisms are within the same species. Habitat diversity is the number of different types of habitats within a given area. So if you have high diversity, you would have quite a number of habitats, whereas low diversity, you would only have one or two habitats represented. To measure biodiversity, we use species richness and species evenness. So again, the richness is the number of species in a given area. This can be influenced by the latitude, which would influence the climate. It could be the time, the habitat size, or the distance from other communities. Species evenness is the relative proportion of individuals of different species in a given area. So if we look at these two examples, both have the same number of species, so their species richness is the same. They both have 4 species. But when we compare the evenness, community 1 is much more even than community 2. In community 1, each species makes up 25% of the community, whereas in community 2, species A is making up 70% of the community. So the other species are only making up 10%. Species A is dominating the community here, so it is not even compared to community 1.